Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of our Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Tiffany. I'll be your educator today as we explore food webs. But before we get started, if you would like to interact with us, we would love to hear from you. If you are watching this on Wednesday, January 22nd at 2 p.m., you can go ahead and text us live at 562 286 1838. We would love to hear from you. You can tell us your comments, your thoughts, or any questions that you might have during this program. This program is for you. You can guide it. Or if you are watching this after we have already aired live, we would still love to hear from you, but instead, please email us at live@lvaop.org. All right. I said that we are going to be checking out food webs. We're going to look at the food webs of two different habitats that are very, very different in both color and shape of animals, all sorts of things. But first off, food webs, what does that mean? Am I talking about a spider's web? A spider's web catches food, right? Is that a food web? I guess so. But what we are talking about today is how animals and plants and their environment are connected to one another in this whole web of energy. So some animals eat plants. That is a transfer of energy from the plant to the animal. Some animals eat other animals. That's again a transfer of energy from that animal to that animal. And then even the plants that I mentioned get their energy from somewhere. So it's all these transfer of energy. Because think about it. When you eat, maybe you're kind of like, oh, me, like around 2 p.m., around right now, I'm like, oh man, I really need a snack. I eat a snack and then I feel like I have more energy. Food gives us energy. And that is what the food web is all about. Where is the energy going throughout this habitat? So, like I said, we have plants. Plants get their energy from, how do plants get their energy? Do they eat food? Do they have mouths? No, they make their own energy, right? Wait, how do they make their own food? How do they do that? You might have heard of photosynthesis. So plants and these algae do photosynthesis, and that is how they get their energy. How does photosynthesis work? You might see some beautiful sunlight coming down. They get their energy from the sun, don't they? And then there are animals that are going to eat the kelp or plants, and there are animals that eat those animals. So let's take a couple of moments to just notice, what do we have here in this habitat, in this home for animals? What do we have? Kind of make a list for yourself. What living plants do we have? What animals do we have? And then you can start thinking about the food chain. What eats what in this habitat? Oh, I saw a really big fish go by. That one is probably towards the top of the food chain, right? I saw a school of tiny fish. Even, you see that? You see those little specks going by? Even those little specks are part of the food web. There is stuff called plankton. We have phytoplankton and we have zooplankton. Phytoplankton meaning plant plankton, so teeny little pieces of plant that kind of float around. And then zooplankton meaning animal. Think about a zoo. Zooplankton, animal plankton. So teeny tiny little animals. It could be tiny, tiny little shrimp. It could be baby little fish. But even those little specks that you see floating around are part of this food chain. Ooh, we saw a shark. That shark is probably towards the top of the food chain. We see some small fish that are schooling around. All right, so let's think about some of the characters that are in play in this habitat. So I'm going to go over to my document camera and we can list out some of the characters that we see in this beautiful kelp forest. So we know that we have the sun, we have the kelp, we saw some small fish, we saw some large fish. I talked about the plankton, those tiny little specks. We saw a shark. Now that shark that was in there, it's actually a pretty small species of shark, but it is a shark nonetheless. It is called a leopard shark. Did we see anything else in there? We did see some big fish, so I said some large fish. So let's go ahead and get started with this and talk about how that energy is moving around from animal to animal or from plant to animal. So let's start at the beginning of our food web. Well, what is the beginning? Is the beginning our kelp? Close. Where does the kelp get its energy from? From the sun, right? I think I'm zoomed out all the way. Okay, so the sun is giving energy to the kelp. So then we have an arrow that points from the sun to the kelp because that is showing the transfer of energy. And if you want, you can follow along and draw your own food web if you're in class or if you're at home, drawing your own food web, even adding in some of your own animals. Maybe you saw other animals that I'm not quite talking about. So we are going from energy from the sun and that energy goes to that kelp. Now, do you think that there are animals that eat the kelp? Yeah, of course. Maybe some of those small fish could eat the kelp, but there are some other animals that live in this kelp forest that we did not see in that exhibit. Now, that exhibit that we saw is here at the aquarium, and we call it our Blue Cavern exhibit, but it doesn't mean that it has every single animal that lives in a kelp forest. We have some other animals that can be found in a kelp forest that aren't in that exhibit, such as an urchin. Yes, an urchin. That was perfect. So that animal can also live in a kelp forest, and you see what they're on? They're on a piece of kelp. Guess what? This animal's mouth is on the bottom, and it eats kelp. So we can put small fish and urchin small fish and urchin into our food web. But now, are there animals that eat small fish and urchins? Of course there are. We can have some large fish that eat the small fish, like our giant sea bass. Yes, look at this huge mouth. And just look at this animal in general. What do you notice about this animal? It's large. What color? What do you notice about its pattern? You see that it's kind of two different shades of gray, maybe even black. And we see that it is spotted. This animal, to me, if you remember the habitat that we were just looking at, it had large rocks. And this animal looks a lot, yeah, look at those rocks. This animal, I know, that's a white sea bass. Or they're giant. Ooh. We have a couple, oh my gosh. Look at that master of disguise back there. Oh my gosh. But this animal, you can see that it's moving around pretty slowly. It's kind of hanging out towards the bottom of the kelp forest. So we have animals, some hang out just in the top, some hang out kind of like in the mid layer, some hang out just towards the bottom. This animal is definitely hanging out towards the bottom, and it looks a lot like one of these rocks, okay? And it is honestly going to kind of pretend to be a rock to some of these fish that are really none the wiser. We call a giant sea bass an ambush predator because do you think that big fish, wherever it's now hiding, can chase down a bunch of small fish? Does it look like they have similar speeds? I have seen, ooh, there's a giant sea bass. I have seen the giant sea bass swim pretty fast, but I don't think it's going to be able to have that same amount of endurance as a bunch of small fish do. So instead of being super speedy and chasing down its food, instead it ambushes. It's going to sit there quietly and wait until something goes by because that something thinks like, oh, that's just a rock. I swim by rocks all the time. And then, bah, has one big fast burst of speed. You saw that huge mouth. One fast burst of speed to just suck in whatever that animal was that was swimming by. So our giant sea bass is definitely an example of a large fish that can eat small fish. So I'm going to put large fish, and I'm going to put giant sea bass. They can definitely eat some small fish. Now that urchin, that urchin is really spiky. Do you think the giant sea bass is also going to eat urchins? No. We might need something that has teeth or that can use tools to try and eat an urchin. Now, I didn't see one in Blue Cavern, but there is a fish called a sheephead that has some pretty big teeth. And yes, that is a picture of a sheephead. This is a pretty big fish that is also found in our kelp forest, and it has some serious teeth. That animal can eat urchins. Because of those big teeth, it can kind of crack open that hard outside, I almost want to call it a shell, all those spines, and then eat the meat inside. So guess what? For urchin, we can also put large fish. Ooh, there's a picture of that sheephead head on. Look at those teeth. It almost reminds me of like a vampire or something. Look at those teeth. So those teeth are super important tool for these fish to be able to eat those urchins because guess what? Other fish that are in this habitat aren't trying to eat those urchins. Those spikes of that urchin are a very good defense because not a lot of animals want to try and eat that urchin. But this fish, the proper tools, its teeth, can eat urchins. So I'm going to write large fish again. I'm going to write sheephead. Those can eat an urchin. Now there's another animal that can eat an urchin, and they actually use tools. They have some pretty serious teeth, but they also use tools to eat urchins. And we're not going to find that in our Blue Cavern exhibit because it is the sea otter. I think Blue Cavern would be pretty cool if we had an entire kelp forest with sea otters there, but it might be a little chaotic. This marine mammal, see its cute little paws, has the ability to use tools. It can dive down to the seafloor where we saw those rocks. That's where the urchins are going to be hanging out because the kelp attaches to those rocks and the urchins want to eat the kelp. It can dive on down, pick up an urchin, carry it back up to the surface, and then guess what? It can use a rock to crack off all of those spines and then eat the meat that is inside of that urchin. So sea otter is one of those animals that can also, and I have one here, that can also eat an urchin. So we have sea otter added in now to our food web. Now, some other animals that we talked about, one was like that leopard shark. Where do you think the leopard shark fits in? Is the leopard shark eating the urchin? Probably not. Is the leopard shark eating the large fish? So this is a picture of the leopard shark. And like I said, this is a pretty small shark. And look at its color pattern. That is some great camouflage that it has, very similar to that giant sea bass that we saw. Now, do you see the mouth of this animal? So here's its head. You can see its eye over here. Its mouth is down below. So it's more so hanging out kind of towards the bottom and trying to find some stuff that's hanging out towards the bottom. Maybe it can be eating those small fish, but it could also be eating animals that are hanging out in the sand as well. So I can add it over here into our food web as another animal that's eating that small fish. Leopard shark. But our leopard shark might also eat some animals like a crab, and our sea otter can definitely eat that as well. Sea stars can also be found in this habitat, and sea otters can eat those as well. So crab and sea star. Crab can be eaten by sea otter. Sea star can be eaten by otter. We can also have an arrow going to that leopard shark as well. Now, where did the crab and the sea star get their energy from? So we might want to think that they are eating the kelp, and crabs can definitely eat kelp, but they are also going to be eating meat. Meat? What kind of meat? Well, sea star can be eating things in shells like mussels. Crabs can also find dead things that are in the habitat and eat those as well. So it can kind of be a little bit of a scavenger, but the sea star is going to be able to eat things in shells like mussels and clams. Where are those animals getting their energy from? Mussels and clams kind of filter through the water, and those are animals that are going to be eating that zoo and phytoplankton that we had talked about earlier. Remember when we were looking at the webcam and those tiny little specks were kind of flying around? Those little specks can be plankton. Yeah, we even see some right now. Those little specks can be tiny little plants or tiny little animals. And those animals that live in shells are filtering out the water and eating those tiny little specks. So everything from the giant bass all the way to tiny, tiny little specks are all part of this food web and all an important part of this habitat. Now, I did say we were going to be talking about two habitats today. So let's move over to somewhere a bit warmer with a lot more color. Yes. So where are we now? We are now in a coral reef. Let's take a couple of moments to observe this webcam. Now this is an exhibit that we have here at the aquarium. It's called Coral Predators. So maybe that gives away a little bit of information as to our food web in this habitat. But let's try to figure out what are some of the animals or plants that are in this habitat. First of all, coral. We see a lot of coral. It's beautiful. What is it? Is it a plant? Is it an animal? Is it a rock? A rock won't really be in the food web, will it? Because it's not alive. But rocks are still important parts of the habitat, just like we saw in our kelp forest. The kelp was hanging onto the rocks. Without the rocks, there's no kelp. But that wouldn't be part of our food web. So, is the coral going to be part of our food web? It definitely is part of our food web. Coral is kind of a 2-for-1, maybe even a 3-for-1. Coral itself is made up of tiny little polyps. And those tiny little polyps are in fact an animal. Because those tiny little polyps, look at this. See all those tiny little fingers? They're using those tiny little fingers to try and catch some food, just like a sea anemone. Yeah. See, all those, look, tiny fingers. They're trying to grab tiny little food. Around it, they kind of build this skeleton-like structure that's a lot like a rock. But do we see the color of the coral? That color is a type of algae called zooxanthellae. So just like we were talking about the kelp in the kelp forest before being a type of algae, this tiny little coloration inside of all these little coral polyps, that is also algae. So because this is algae inside of the coral, and that kelp was algae, where did that kelp get its energy? From the sun, right? So the zooxanthellae is also going to get its energy from the sun. It's going to do photosynthesis, and then guess what? It makes all of its own food, and it's going to share some of that food with the coral. The coral, which is an animal. So all of this beautiful, beautiful coral we see here are a huge colony of animals, and inside of those little animals, each one of those little animals, is algae. So let's go ahead and get started with some of the animals that we are finding in this coral reef. Look at this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful coral reef. Okay, we have the coral, right? We have the sun, and we are again going to have those little specks, the zooplankton and the phytoplankton. What else did we see living in there? You might have seen some small colorful fish. Maybe you know from one of your favorite ocean-themed movies that some of those small fish might be clownfish. We saw, just briefly, a very, very beautiful fish called a parrotfish. Let's go ahead and get started on our food web with these animals and potential plants. Okay, so just like last time, the sun is going to be the source of all of our energy in our food web. Sun. Okay. Now, who is receiving that energy? In one way, the coral is. Not the coral itself, because remember we said coral is an animal, but the algae that lives inside of that coral, the zooxanthellae, is getting its energy from the sun. But let's think about the animal coral itself. Where is it getting its energy? So it is getting some of its energy from its pal, the zooxanthellae. Remember, it's a little animal, and it has those tiny little, what looks like little fingers, and it's grabbing. What is it grabbing? It's grabbing tiny little plankton. So we can also have over here plankton. And if that plankton is phytoplankton, meaning plant plankton, guess what? It is getting its energy from the sun, and then that plankton gets energy to the coral. Now, remember I said that coral is kind of a 3-for-1. It's an animal, it has a little plant roommate, and then it makes this rock-like structure around it. So because it has that rock-like structure, there's no way any animals eat it, right? Who wants to eat a rock? Except we do have animals in the coral reef that eat coral. Now their goal isn't to eat rock, right? But they want the little polyps that are inside of that hard coral. And one of those animals is the parrotfish. Look at this goofy little smile. That goofy little smile is the tool that this fish is using to eat the coral. Remember in the kelp forest how the sheephead had those big teeth, and that is how it's able to eat that hard to eat urchin? Well, look at look at this animal here, and it has basically what looks like a beak. Those are its teeth kind of fused together to make a beak-like structure like a bird. That's why it's called a parrotfish. But this is its tool so that it is able to eat that coral. So this animal is getting its energy from the coral. Now, like I said, no animal really wants to eat the rock, and actually their body doesn't really get any nutrients from that rock-like structure of the coral, but rather it gets the nutrients from the little coral polyps itself. So, fun fact about parrotfish is in many tropical places, they have beautiful white sand beaches, very picturesque. Some of that sand is actually parrotfish poop. Little fun fact for you. So coral is then giving its energy to the parrotfish. All right, let's go back to our coral predators and see what other animals we can find. We see more of those specks that I was talking about. And we see lots of small, colorful fish. Ooh, look at that. That's the parrotfish. Look. Oh, it's coming in to say hello. That is perfect timing. Thank you for showing us your mouth. Now, the coral that we have here in this exhibit is artificial. People have made this coral. But if the coral in here is not real, then what on earth is the parrotfish eating? Well, think about what it is actually eating. The coral polyps, and the coral polyps also have the zooxanthellae, the algae inside of it. So we can feed our parrotfish meat and veggies, but then we also put things in there for them to kind of munch on, because remember, they're also used to eating that hard coral. Even though they don't actually digest and get nutrients from it, they are used to eating it. So there are things that we can put into their habitat that they still can eat. But I find it really funny that some of the animals, like these small little fish over here, they're algae eaters. But we clean these exhibits. We don't really want algae growing everywhere, so how are we feeding them? A good replacement is actually lettuce. So we'll put lettuce into some of the exhibits where we have algae eaters. I find that to be kind of funny for us, or for them, to see lettuce in their exhibits. But we see lots of small, colorful fish. I had mentioned we can add some small fish into our exhibit. So some of those small fish can be eating the plankton. And remember that plankton can be a plant or an animal. Some plankton is always small and sees the plankton its entire life. And some plankton are just like baby fish that then grow up into be big fish. And then they're no longer plankton anymore. Well, another animal that is a plankton for its entire life, let me actually grab a sea jelly. So we don't have any sea jellies in that exhibit that I was just showing you, but we do have many different types of jellies here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, and they actually stay a plankton their entire life. So would they be zooplankton or phytoplankton? Zooplankton, because they are an animal. But this is an animal that's towards the bottom of the food chain, as we say, because many animals can eat them. All right, students, that is all that we have time for today, and we have barely scratched the surface on the food webs in these two habitats. But again, if you have any more questions, we would love to hear from you, but please email us at live@lvaop.org. If you are watching with us today and you are in a group, please feel free to text us how many are watching today. Knowing how many are watching helps us to better understand how we are serving our community. We do have another program later today at 3, so we hope to see you there. Until then, have a great day and continue exploring.